Hello Harja, agus gur céad mai go bhís a bheith lenne ríis den chead a granile seo a Blúiríní Béaloidis, lom héin Claire Doohan agus le comradí Galtana Galgaia Jonny Dillon. Hello Jonny.
Hello.
Now, Jonny might be laughing to himself there because I've just described him as a puckish, mischievous sort of a fellow with a sunny disposition.
Oh.
Which is fairly accurate, isn't it?
That'll do.
I would have thought, yeah. Not bad qualities for a future husband. It's certainly better than being described as a ban throma crotha, which is don't laugh now, Jonny, a cranky, heavy-headed woman, or a ban yillergantna glora, a loud honking woman. Two heavily derogatory descriptors for the type of woman you should not pursue when looking for a potential wife. Just take note there, Jonny.
Duly noted. Yeah.
Heaven forbid. No, much better then to go with a ban morghire, ban wenla wakanta, or a woman who is sanguine and loyal like a sheep. Now, this is simply by way of introduction to some of the themes we'll be looking at in this month's episode, one chosen to coincide with the arrival of St. Valentine's Day.
Hooray.
Hooray! Love and magic in Irish folk tradition. We should note that there will be no red roses, no chocolates, no romantic weekends in Paris, or dodgy cards from your mother. Instead, we'll have martyred saints. Did you get one of those, Jonny?
A martyred saint? Yes.
No cards from your mother. Masquerading as...
No, never. I don't know what you're talking about.
Instead, we'll have martyred saints, sexist proverbs and marriage guidance, as you saw above there, abductions, elopements, love matches, dowry settlements, stressed Shrovetide singletons, horning, which is not what you think, and love, luck and charms. Beats a box of chocolates any day. So sit with us for an hour and immerse yourselves in some of the perhaps lesser known customs and practices observed in folk tradition as they pertain to love, relationships and marriage. Casting a spotlight on older domestic structures and social psychologies, it's a theme, although introduced with a kind of light touch there, did have a huge resonance in the lives of our parents and grandparents, colouring their social and economic standing and marking key transitions, or not as the case may be, in the life cycle of the individual and the domestic family unit. So we'll kick things off then by looking at love as it was represented in the early literary tradition before moving on to look at more solid expressions of these themes in folk tradition and our customs and practices. So I might hand over to you.
Why not?
And get us started.
There's an enormous amount of stuff to go through. And I suppose in the early literature to start as well, Kenneth Jackson in his book A Celtic Insanity, which is one of my absolute favourite books ever, he talks about love. He has different sections of the early Irish literature. He has translations of kind of early Irish poetry and bits of Cornish and kind of Breton, all sorts of stuff. But he has a section on love in that, but he notes that in the early literature, there's actually very little by way of reference to love as far as the poetry is concerned. But there are certain kind of narratives. The most notable maybe would be the Dream of Angus. Angus, where he has this kind of dream where this beautiful woman appears from the night and he's sick. He's pronounced as kind of being ill by a doctor, basically. And he has to go and find this woman. But the adventure is more so about his kind of how he wins her, how he finds her.
Okay.
But there's less concern with the psychological impacts and effects of love itself. But you see that then come into the literature later on with the kind of romance genres of even the likes of in the kind of medieval period, or even with the kind of Norman influence. And you see things like in the French tradition, Parzival, that links into the kind of Arthurian romances and all that sort of stuff. And so they kind of, there are narratives, I suppose, that have those kind of features in them in the early literature later on. But certainly in folk tradition, as far as sean-nós and songs and stuff like that, every other song is about being a broken-hearted mess, basically.
It is. Love betrayed.
Yes.
Love unrequited. Love lost.
Love lost, and just the whole gamut. So it's not to say that it's absent from folk tradition, but in the early literature, it's Kenneth Jackson makes the observation that it doesn't feature in the way that you might think. There's an enormous amount of nature poetry or descriptions of kind of love affairs and so on and so forth, but not the kind of romantic literature that you might think.
It's love is disease, isn't it, in the old literature?
Yeah, in many instances, yeah. That's like the dream of wandering Angus then, and that's kind of very much his. He's sick and he's kind of deranged basically because of this woman who's appeared to him in a dream until he's able to find her.
It's nice though in that sense that we have that proverb still to this day that Galaran re na lesan livna. So that love is an illness that can't be cured by herbs.
Or the only cure for love is marriage.
Oh, well, there you go. We've set our theme now, anti-romantic.
We have, but the I suppose the most notable maybe of the kind of the genres, maybe in Irish tradition, or tales particularly, would be Diarmuid and Grania, which is part of the Fenian cycle, which people might be familiar with, where there's a couple, basically this young woman, Grania, is meant to be married off to Fionn McCool, the leader of the Fianna.
The older man.
At this stage, he's a kind of elderly man. He's had several wives already. His last wife has died, and he's about to be married to Grania. She's not particularly impressed being married to a man who's as old enough to be her grandfather. So she puts a geis, a taboo on Diarmuid, one of these younger warriors of the Fianna, and binds him to kind of steal away with her, basically. And so they take off and hide in the woods in Athlone, and all sorts of kind of adventures befall them, basically, where the Fianna and Fionn are trying to hunt them down. And at the end, their everything is kind of resolved, and they have a family together and so on. But at the end of the narrative, Diarmuid goes off hunting with Fionn and the others, and he's gored by a bull or a boar, I think, while they're hunting. And Fionn had the capability of the water that was drunk from his hands had healing properties.
From Finn's hands?
From Finn's hands, yeah. And as he was going to give the water to Diarmuid, he let it slip out of his hand. It poured through his fingers twice. I guess the bitterness from the previous
Could be.
And then at the third time, he held it and drank to him, but it was too late. Diarmuid was dead. And he also had the ball strike at the love spot.
Oh,
that was given
yes.
to him. He was hunting in the woods one night, and he met the personification of youth. And they slept together, and then she gave him this love spot which she put in his head, and then anyone who looked at it fell in love with him.
That's a very common motif in all the stories that we have. Well, many of the stories we have related
and
to the couple.
It said then that influenced the later medieval romance, or as it appeared, with Tristan and Isolde, Tristan and Isolde and so on, which that Irish princess, she was stolen away to Cornwall in the course of that narrative, but Chapel Lizard apparently is named after her, that she might have been buried there.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Apparently, yeah, in Dublin there. But although there are kind of I think the earliest reference to Diarmuid and Grania is in the Book of Leinster in the 12th century. But in the early literature, you have these fantastic kind of descriptions of love poetry and so on later on, but it doesn't really feature until the medieval that you have this kind of romantic love poetry as such, that seems maybe to have come in from other kind of European sources, or from the Normans, and that sort of courtly love theme, basically. But it's important to bear in mind as well, in folk tradition, in the singing tradition and songs and so on, it's absolutely it's racked with broken-hearted love songs everywhere, as is the way.
I was going to read a little bit here that I found now. It's by translation, but it just shows the representation of love through physical beauty in those early Old Irish sagas and stories. And we have one called Tógáil Brudne da Dearga, and it's incredible how he describes the woman who catches his eye. So he goes into extensive detail where he describes every facet of her being, but I'll just...
the descriptive stuff is just amazing in the early poetry. It's incredible. That's the thing that... Yeah.
Oh my God. So just for a kind of a quick little snapshot for brevity here. There she was, undoing her hair to wash it, with her arms out through the sleeve holes of her smock. White as the snow of one night were the two hands, soft even, and red as foxglove were the two clear, beautiful cheeks. Dark as the back of a stag beetle were the two eyebrows. Like a shower of pearls were the teeth in her head. Blue as hyacinth were the eyes. Red as rowan berries the lips. Very high, smooth, and soft white the shoulders. Clear, white, and lengthy the fingers. Long were the hands. White as the foam of the wave was the flank, slender, long, tender, smooth, soft as wool. Polished and warm, sleek and white were the two thighs. Round and small, hard and white the two knees. Short and white and rule straight the two shins. Because God knows the shins are what does it.
Check those shins.
Check those shins.
Here's one amazing one from the 16th or 17th century called Happy for You, Blind Man. And this guy he's had enough, it seems. He's fairly human. He's saying, happy for you, blind man, who see nothing of women. If you saw what I see, you would be sick even as I am. Would God I had been blind before I saw her curling hair, her white-flanked, splendid, snowy body. My life is distressful to me. I pitied blind men until my peril grew beyond all sorrow. I have changed my pity, though pitiful to envy. I am ensnared by the maid of the curling locks. Alas for him who has seen her, and alas for him who does not see her every day. Alas for those trapped in her love, and alas for those who escape. Alas for him who goes to meet her, and alas for him who does not meet her. Alas for him who is with her, and alas for him who is not with her. Ilium Rua there.
Oh.
Japers. The descriptive stuff is really incredible.
It is. It really is. And you can see it filter down. But even just that, when you said being ensnared by the curls of her hair, that's like, Yeats's Black Penny.
What's that?
I can't remember it now off the top of my head, but it's lovely. But if you Google Yeats, The Black Penny, it's a beautiful little love poem. So that's us looking at the literary tradition and how it's filtered down. And it makes sense now probably just to narrow our focus slightly into the more practical aspects of love in society, perhaps with an emphasis on marriage in society and marriage in Irish society, which is a whole other kettle of fish. Now, traditional rites of passage, be they ceremonial, ritualistic, religious, biological, they've been known to exist in societies throughout human history, marking as they do the passage from one social status to another or from one biological state to another. So the transition from childhood to puberty to adulthood. You've got the 7 sacraments, you've got childbirth, and one of the big ones is marriage. Now, these, I suppose we could just say and note, we spoke about this gentleman yesterday, Jonny Arnold van Gennep, who apparently actually coined the phrase rites of passage.
He did.
Which I did not know. Is that actually accurate?
Le Rite de Passage or something. Yeah, it was his book, 1901 or 04 or something, yeah.
I think it was 1909, you'll find.
Oh, God.
Yes, I'll just...
Right, angry letters. Incorrect.
But he was very interested in, I suppose, the distribution of these rites and the kind of the interpretation of them as a class of phenomena in their own right. And he was a folklorist, which I didn't know, which, again, just a high five for the folklorist. But he held that these rites of passage consist of 3 distinguishable consecutive elements: separation, transition, and reincorporation. But marriage, again, is one such rite of passage, as we describe it in Ireland, seen as a clear marker in the transition to adulthood. Because, and again, I hadn't really thought about this much growing up, but that age isn't necessarily a marker for the transition in Ireland. It's more the events in life that kind of mark transitions sometimes in social status. So a married male, for example, of 25 could be considered a man because he was married, while an unmarried man of 40 was still considered a boy, and equally so for a female. And the more you read about it, it just seems so sad in how people could be overlooked and treated so badly because of this sense that they had somehow failed the social contract in not getting married, which was seen as the norm. And to be any way other or outside this infrastructure and this kind of framework that society had set down, you were seen as
failing, basically.
Failing, yeah. And it's just awful. We'll come to kind of more of this social disapprobation and I suppose this social unease that people faced when they didn't adhere to these norms. And even Kevin O'Donnell, who was our ethnologist here in the department, he speaks of an example.
The fieldwork.
Yes, of going with his students to speak to an informant, an older man.
Mossel Critten's son, Sean O'Critten.
Is that who it was? And he took, I imagine there was a mix of girls and boys, but the girls, he noticed after a while that the informant had kind of taken one aside and was giving her more attention and kind of speaking to her more kind of confidently and confidentially.
He was chatting away intently in the corner to her, and the rest were kind of sent away. Yeah.
Having to be occupied by poor Kevin. And it was because she was married and he viewed her differently to the other girls who could have been the same age but were unmarried.
Yeah.
Isn't that?
Yeah, it's amazing. That's the primary, the idea of even the coming of age of being 21 or 18 or something is as a legalistic concept, has no ritual or traditional value in the Irish context, in the sense that that you've suddenly kind of reached some marker. And like you mentioned there about the idea of unmarried boys of 50 or unmarried girls of 50, there was another account, I think it was by Kevin Danner, who described it as well, of a rural politician, a rural TD in Parliament in the 1940s, I think, who was kind of pilloried and mocked by his colleagues for talking about the plight of unmarried boys of 40 and over in the country. The plight of unmarried boys of 40 and over in the country, wherever in his home parish and so on. And what he meant was just that these were boys, not men. But it didn't matter what age they were, that manhood isn't a temporal thing, it's a social thing, or womanhood likewise. And then these figures kind of become part of the comedy of life and are kind of mocked in many ways, and where tradition then kind of, I suppose, applies a certain pressure onto individuals to say this isn't how the ideal is meant to behave. You know, so in that sense, that it's not so much, like I said, when you turn 21, now you're a man or now you're a woman. It's when you're married, no matter the age, that's when you get the full status. And for Van Gennep and the ritual, it's important to bear in mind as well when thinking about rituals. Rituals are specifically transformative practices in that you step into a phase as A and you step out of it as the ritual as B, and that ritual is the liminal kind of component where you're in between. And that's where all the kind of the strange, literally that's where the magic happens, as it were, and that's the kind of the strange in between, I suppose, space, literally the kind of threshold space that a person enters into. But the idea is that these, to be traditionally recognized as a man or a woman in your society, it's a communal thing. I can go out onto the front steps of the university here and kind of boldly declare myself an Opal Astra or whatever, but no one's going to heed that because it doesn't matter that that's what you identify as. It's what how are you viewed in the context of the community traditionally. And it's the same with the process of betrothal and then into marriage. These individuals go from one state into another in the eyes of the community, and now they're kind of fully fledged members of it, so that the young married man of 20 and his older uncle of 50 who's unmarried is a boy to be sent around doing menial tasks, basically, because he hasn't taken the plunge, as it were.
And you see a lot of those, there's great symbolism around the events that mark these transitions as well, just to represent that kind of, whether you physically enter one door and you physically exit another, or you come alone but you leave together,
or don't come home the way you came,
exactly,
or things like that.
Again, marking that you go in as one but you change, you come out having changed in some way to represent that.
And even for example the whole context of the groom not seeing the bride, or there's in some way, shape or form, there's the rite of separation prior to the ritual itself, where the individuals are removed from each other and then they're reincorporated in a new phase together. So there's this kind of liminal kind of, again, things that you just take for granted, like, well, what are we actually kind of doing here, I suppose. And Van Gennep makes the point as well that as you go down the scale of kind of civilized societies into more traditional societies, you'll see that the sacred takes center stage over the secular, basically. And for it's those strange in between periods, or when a person is in the home, in the communal setting of the home, they're in the world of the profane, in the world of the secular, whatever. When you step outside of the home and travel to a foreign place, or you're among strangers and so on, now you're in the world of the sacred, of the unknown, of the dangerous and so on. And a lot of these rituals treat people in that certain sense, that they have to be excluded from the community for a while and then slowly reincorporated again, but in a new state, basically. And marriage, I suppose, is a primary concern, and the ritual aspects of the life cycle in human condition as well are a primary and fundamental concern. And again, this points to the fundamental nature of the importance of folk tradition, that it relates to those areas of human life that people have these extreme concerns about, i.e. birth or death or transition to the afterlife, or marriage or betrothal, or economic concerns, pregnancy, conception, whatever. So you see that at marriage there's an enormous amount of kind of customary tradition attached to this. These ritual practices, basically.
So it's a hugely stressful time in someone's life. The more I read, because obviously if I never get married, I'll be fine with that. And there's no sense that people would look at me differently, because so many people choose either not to get married and just remain with their partner for a variety of reasons. Whereas reading some of the recollections here, like you see women speaking about, by the time I was 20, I really felt the clock's ticking, and this kind of sense of kind of personal pressure that they placed on themselves, but also this kind of from parents, from the wider family, from broader society and their community.
The culture applies pressure to you,
a huge weight on their shoulders. And there was one woman who was speaking about feeling once she turned, she was 20 or 21, and saw her friends getting married, she really felt this weight of pressure, and within the year she was married. And you kind of wonder, is that because she's set out on a mission? And you kind of wonder to yourself, what decisions are colouring your choices, and are you making the right choices for you as a person, or are you being really railroaded in some way by society?
This is a different view, I suppose. Well, I guess you're always being railroaded by society, so in some way we're always kind of beaming and transmitting to one another, what are we meant to do or not do. And tradition applies a framework and a pressure, and it kind of sluices you into it, like, right, you need to maintain and carry on now, and that if everyone was to, I suppose, fragment in this absolutely atomized individualism or whatever, then there would be no community or kind of anything to manifest or continue itself or whatever. But the I suppose the most glaring maybe difference in the modern context, really, with to look at marriage in a traditional context, is that for a great many people, marriage wasn't just to preserve the two individuals. It was a wider kind of communal concern. Basically, it was the families coming together. There were dowries involved.
There was land to be transmitted.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that was. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day entirely. I mean, it does in part, I suppose, what you feel about it. I suppose also you have the family is trying to maintain its land or expand on it or maintain their kind of economic concerns, whatever.
And their good name.
Their good name is the other huge thing, and then to try and marry with a certain economic parity or someone who'll suit or another family with a good name or whatever, and not to marry beneath you and all sorts of stuff. There's a lot to navigate basically in a traditional context, I suppose, that we see with even that expresses itself then in the matchmakers and so on. These figures who used to go around and kind of conduct these things.
And we'll actually come to the Shrovetide tradition more clearly now shortly, because that's something that this is the time of year, Shrovetide, from the 6th of January.
Actually, it's later. I was reading. It's the end of January. It's this what's the word? Some Latin word for the 70th day or something. Shrove starts at the period when it's within over 70 but less than 60 days from Easter. On that Sunday, Shrove starts.
And then ends on Lent.
And then it ends at Lent.
Okay.
And since, I think it was 1586 or 1563 or something, 11th of November, either way,
yes. It was a Tuesday.
Oh, do you remember it? Right. I remember the 11th of November, 1586 or something. There was the Decree of Trent, or the Council of Trent. And yes.
Yes.
No, the Council of Trent they barred, there's like an ecclesiastical prohibition on, what was it, the solemn celebration of the
matrimony,
of the sacrament of matrimony in the penitential season of Lent.
Yes.
This is the thing that you cannot, and they also in chapter 10 of the same decree are at lengths or at pains to describe the fact that this isn't a recent innovation of the church. It's always been this way, that during this 40-day period of Lent, no marriages can take place. But Shrove appears from the end of January going into February. Then that's the period just beforehand. And so in folk tradition, Kevin Denner again says that his view is that it's become recognised that there's a prohibition during this penitential season of Lent. So then the correct time to marry is just before that penitential season.
But that's a misinterpretation, isn't it?
It seems that's kind of... Now, the early law, if we go back to the Breton law tracts, they say that the time for marriage was in November, which makes sense from an agricultural kind of point of view. But from the more, I suppose, in the medieval on and the more recent folk tradition, after this decree from Trent, or whatever, 1500s, it was that the penitential kind of season of Lent bars people from engaging in the sacrament of matrimony, so they have to do so just beforehand. And that is this time now of Shrove and this kind of period. Shrove meaning to confess, to shrive or shrieve or whatever, as this kind of period prior to this 40-day period. And the 40-day fasting and period of asceticism and so is interesting itself. That appears in a variety of wisdom traditions, religions and so on, Hinduism and Buddhism as well, this kind of 40-day period of fasting or whatever. But now for Shrove, now is the time for people to marry. This is the traditional time. I have a piece here of Lilo Holton in 1980. Lilo Holton is from the inner city in Dublin, and she's describing Lent when she was growing up, what it was like, and how severe it was, and how there were no marriages at that time.
And was Lent very strict?
Lent was very strict. There was no butter, no milk, no butter, no meat of any kind, no eggs.
The whole of Lent?
The whole of Lent. No butter on your bread, and then be the same then for the early plain tea, as usual.
And would people do other penances as well?
Oh yes, they used to go off fasting now.
And used people get married in Lent, or...?
No marriage in Lent. And the marriages that time was of a Sunday. They were of a Sunday, and then they were cut out. And the burials was of a Sunday, and that's cut out.
But would people get engaged before Lent or anything?
Oh, before Lent, and married before Lent. Yes, they get married and engaged before Lent.
And would people ever say that if you didn't get married before Lent, you had to wait another year?
Well, no, once Lent was up, then you were free. You were free. the Easter will come along, and then they get married.
So that's Nido Holden describing just, Lent prohibitions, no marriage, but then in May they'd commence again.
Oh, I see. And Shrove Tuesday was apparently a big day for weddings, that it would be very popular in communities to see couples rushing to the altar.
Pancake Tuesday, which is our, again, version of Mardi Gras, Fat Tuesday, that they have elsewhere. This is the celebratory feast prior to the period of fasting.
One last hurrah, so to
Exactly.
speak.
Where so in the house, all of the perishable items are used up, all the eggs are used up, all the butter and eggs and whatever. Like Lilo was saying there, you couldn't have any of this stuff, milk and so on. And you make zillions of pancakes. And then,
which interestingly can be used for divination. And you
yes,
had
they
a
can,
funny
hilariously.
example.
Well, there's just this, I just thought it was hilarious. A description here of Shrove Tuesday in Halls, Ireland. Mr. and Mrs. Hall, who travelled around every parish up and down the country, the amazing volumes that you can kind of read about their descriptions of their travels. But they're also interested in folklore because they describe the varying traditions and customs that pertain to the time. This describes the tossing of pancakes and marriage divination for one lucky girl and one unlucky girl, basically. So it says the family group and the boys and girls of the neighbours gather around the fireside, and each in turn tries his or her skill in tossing the pancake. The tossing of the first is always allotted to the eldest unmarried daughter of the host, who performs the task not altogether without trepidation, for much of her luck during the year is supposed to depend on her good or ill success on the occasion. She tosses it, and usually so cleverly as to receive it back again without a ruffle on its surface, on its reverse, in the pan. Congratulations upon her fortune go round, and another makes the effort. Perhaps this is a sad mischance. The pancake is either not turned, or falls among the turf ashes. The unhappy maiden is then doomed. She can have no chance of marrying for a year at least, while the girl who has been lucky is destined to have her pick of the boys as soon as she likes. The cake she has tossed, she is once again called upon to share, and cutting it into many slices as there are guests, she hands one to each. Sometimes the mother's wedding ring has been slipped into the batter out of which this first cake is made, and the person who receives the slice in which it is contained is not only to be first married, but is to be doubly lucky in the matter of husband or wife. That sentence when the unhappy maiden is then doomed and she stares at the pancake in the ashes and the crowd goes silent and everyone furrowed brows and scornfully looking. It's fantastic. It's brilliant. But that's Shrove, I suppose. And again, even the period that we are now at a liminal phase that, you can't just go make pancakes on some random Tuesday in January and divine your future husband therefrom. It has to be at this particular period. It relates to Shrove, and this is the kind of the exact time, basically. But Shrove was the traditional kind of marrying season in Ireland.
It's true. And we see it's one of those, we have a questionnaire on Shrove Easter customs and practices with a huge trove of material that's well worth investigating for those who are interested in calendar custom and practices relating to marriage, for example. But one of them it was a busy time of year, as you can imagine, for those looking and hoping to get married. But we have some lovely recollections in the archives of fairs, for example, which would have been popular locations for the arrangement of marriages, or as well as that, elopements for those who wanted to get married but perhaps might have been, I suppose, undermined by the wishes of the family or the community, and so wanted to overcome this, or maybe wanted to overcome a match that had been made for one of the couples elsewhere. So I found a lovely one from my neck of the woods in Donegal, where they speak about Inan Alyanun, or the runaway fair, which is lovely. I'd never heard of it before. On the 6th of January, that's where I got the 6th of January. On the 6th of January, apparently now, this as told by Neil O'Duhy, who was 68, in 1942, he was giving this piece of information to Sean O'Hoy. So he speaks about the remembrance of the runaway fair on the 6th of January, where many couples would meet at the fair and elope, and many of them went to Scotland. So many so, apparently, from Ulster, that Portpatrick in Dumfries and Galloway in the southwest became known as the Gretna Green or the Gretna Green for Irish eloping couples, which just shows the sheer number of people who must have emigrated. But elopements were very popular at this time, but also, whereas some would have eloped to perhaps Scotland and beyond, and sadly some are told that never came back, just because the level of dislike amongst the families, and that it would have been really frowned upon. So they had literally severed the apron strings and all ties and never returned. But for many, this elopement simply showed their commitment to each other, and so the families in time agreed to the marriage, and the practicalities were taken care of. And one of the great monikers that I came across was the Night of the Bottles, or Each in the Mudjal, which was the night that the contract for marriage was agreed, and that the families were going to permit this marriage to go ahead, that they would, once it was all settled, they would crack open the bottles and have a much merriment and
order.
consumption of food and drink.
That'll do.
So yeah, elopements were big at this time.
I met a woman in the archive here a couple of years ago, a good few years ago, who was doing research, and her mother had run away from a match made for her.
Oh my God.
In, I don't remember what part of the country, and she met the man who would become her husband, this woman's father, on the boat going to England that day, but they never came back. Yeah.
Isn't it heartbreaking though when you think
just
about
away,
it?
and that's the end of it, yeah. And I suppose the figure as well, as you mentioned there about sometimes these elopements not being recognised by the family, the huge thing I suppose to understand within the context of Irish tradition, that the major kind of social, or one of the major social divisions maybe in the context of marriage at least, is between the farming classes and then the landless labourers. Because of the economic concerns of land and inheritance and so on, that even for smaller struggling farmers were a preoccupation, that the wedding had to be arranged with an individual who had a certain parity in that regard. So Kevin Danaher again describes this really interestingly, where there's a certain amount of crossover where you could have maybe the daughter of a struggling farmer but who has inherited money from a rich aunt in America or something,
Yes.
could maybe marry a stronger farmer because the economic side can kind of prop it up. And so there's a certain amount of parity between the two.
And she can actually prop herself up as well. I loved hearing that women who, because they were responsible for the dairy products and the dairy work in their farms, they would have little sidelines of selling eggs
And
or
butter and so on.
making clothes and whatnot.
Yeah.
So she would kind of...
That was her money.
That was her money
Yeah.
in order to marry up.
Yeah, and actually what Danaher notes as well, he says that it's the process of modernisation in many ways actually removed that from women. That when it then, say the milk went to the creameries and the eggs were being taken and so on.
It was a
that
matter for the men again.
Yeah, that local industry, or that kind of, that division of labour, I suppose, was removed, you know. Because again, in the traditional context, I suppose you have set divisions of labour and work on the land between men and women, where again in the modern context those things are often reduced to kind of theoretical abstractions, whatever. Arensberg, Conrad M. Arensberg did his study of the Irish countryman. I have that here somewhere, where there's the description between the farmer is describing, I suppose, it's looking at the kind of the complementary dichotomy basically between husband and wife in this sense. This is a farmer describing, he says, "Here's something I want to tell you, and you can put it in your head and take it back with you. The small farmer in Ireland has to have an intelligent wife or he won't last long. He may do for a few years, but after that he can't manage. You take children's clothes. If she knows how to buy material and make the clothes, she saves a lot of money, and there are 1,000 ways an intelligent woman makes money." Here his wife interrupted him and asked, "What about the tillage?" "That's all right," he went on, "but if it wasn't for the woman, the farmer wouldn't last, and when he's getting a wife for one of his sons, he should look to a house where there has been an industrious and intelligent woman, because she has taught her daughters how to work, and that is what is needed." So this is the kind of
Their concerns.
the concerns that they're I suppose that they're ultimately dealing with. And the other thing, when the match was made, and say the male on the farm, for example, who was going to inherit the farm, living with his mother and father in that farm, when he married, his wife would come and live with him. And that also meant then that the man and woman of the house, the parents of that house, now were disengaging from it and taking a back seat, and now the new woman in the house was the woman of the house, and he was the party, whatever. Now often you then had the parents kind of whispering in the ears and so on, but you can imagine the discord or strife that might manifest in that kind of situation
It's like
as well.
a Martin McDonagh play waiting to happen.
Yes, indeed.
It's just
yeah.
this
So,
potential darkness.
but as far as the kind of farming classes were concerned, they could marry to varying degrees. If there was a certain amount of economic parity within their own classes, they could marry maybe even to craftspeople or market people or business people in the local area, whatever. But the one thing that they could never do, that was never to be done, was to marry beneath them, to the class of landless labourer. And the landless labourers, of course, were free from the obligations of economic concerns and hard bargainings and dowries and so on and so forth. They could move up, go to where there was work, build a cabin and marry freely and have a family and so on. And there was a huge population explosion in the 19th century on account of just that, this kind of the class of landless labourer. But the thing I was quite surprised by, in one of Danaher's writings, he describes a small farmer who marries a teacher, which I would have thought, there's a kind of a certain overlap in the kind of the class of people, as it were.
Yes.
But that this the teacher's family were of a labouring kind of class, whatever.
Oh, so even though she was a teacher?
Yeah, and the farming family refused to ever recognise the marriage, ever. And that was just the end of that relationship. So they had a family and everything else, but it wasn't recognised because of so now the inheritance has to go somewhere else. The person is disinherited, basically, and that's it. So there's an economic concern, there are familial concerns, there's the questions of kind of honour and the good name of the family. And into that then, the idea of the figure of the matchmaker appears.
Lovely segue, Jonny.
Thanks. It worked.
We'll finally crack this business.
We will, you know.
But no, matchmaking is a huge tradition and practice that we can't overlook when we're discussing love and relationships, and that they would have played a part. We've still got the Listún Marna matchmaking
Yes, to this
festival.
day that goes on.
Yes, and as you know, on a monthly basis I do a bit of an informal survey with the girls in the house, and one of my flatmates has been, and she finds it very unusual and very hardcore. They mean business.
I would imagine so, yeah.
Yeah, so don't underestimate Listún Marna, which is still going with great spirit and success. But this figure of the matchmaker, Kevin Danaher, is keen to, I suppose, make clear and kind of distinguish between the informal friend.
There were two types.
Yes,
yeah.
exactly. Which sometimes we forget because we just have this Hollywood figure, or the figure in John B. Keane's The Matchmaker. But we could have an informal friend of the couples who would kind of help, the social lubrication that was involved. And then we have the professional matchmaker, this kind of hireling who was concerned with matters of the transition of land and identifying, knowing everyone in the community, knowing who was of marrying age, who would work, who would not, as Jonny was saying, the economic concerns that were prevalent at the time.
And he'd do that for a fee.
He would indeed. Not the worst way to make a living, bringing joy to the world. But interestingly enough, we have a very substantial questionnaire here in the archive, which runs to 7 pages and is probably one of the longest questionnaires I've seen.
As in, the questionnaire itself is 7 pages long.
Yes, with...
Good grief.
And exactly, and with multiple questions. And just to kind of give you a flavour, in your part of the country, are matches made today for farmers' sons and daughters much as they were 50 years ago? What factors are likely to set in motion the process of matchmaking? When does it often happen that the boy who is to succeed the land marries before he gets possession? Does it frequently happen that one son stays in the land, not because he wants to, but because the feeling that somebody must stay to look after the old people? When a marriage is being arranged, is it customary for a written settlement to be made? And on and on and on it goes into every aspect of the matchmaking process. The role of the matchmaker, the economies of the dowry, the transition of land, the impact on the family unit. And it's given how far we've moved away from these practices, to have this trove of information is incredibly valuable. And because it's open for public consultation, you're welcome to come in at any point to have a look. It was compiled and issued in 1956 by Sean O'Sullivan, our archivist, and it was done on behalf of Dr. Kenneth Connell of Queen's University Belfast, who was doing research on the topic at the time. But it just really paints the picture of how matches work, of the matchmaker going to the home of the bride-to-be, working with the father to ascertain or to get his consent whether the match was a good one and whether it met that.
And to bargain a dowry.
Exactly, and the dowry is a big issue that we come to look at as to what the wife would bring to the marriage, and it was usually a case of goods or money or land. Cattle. And this is one of the things I loved in my research was it was a very lucky woman who got a milking cow as part of her dowry, and you can actually see in one parish how this cow moves around over the period of a few years.
Wow.
Because say for example, if I married, say if you had an older brother, so I would marry him and bring the cow with me, but then your older sister would get married, and so she might take the same cow and go to her house.
Oh, I see,
and
right.
then on and on it goes, and this poor cow just settling in,
traipsing
and then
around.
off she goes again. But isn't it fascinating?
That's fantastic. There's Patrick Kennedy, the Wexford writer. He in the 19th century was making these collections that he describes the experience, I suppose, or the setup basically of the, not so much the kind of the hireling matchmaker that you mentioned, but the friendly family friend.
Yes.
Who acts as the best man on behalf of the kind of the aspirant, say. And he describes the accidentally on purpose meeting these families and so on, and then they're going into a tavern. So Kennedy describes here the scene set out basically between the couple, the prospective couple, and the families. He says, were we to enter the comfortable little tavern in Back Lane in about an hour, we should be greeted by a strong odour of lemon punch or mulled beer, and find the black man and the seniors at one table. The black man is the best man, the matchmaker. Okay. That's his nickname. Talking and drinking, and no one anyway particular about using a separate tumbler, and probably Margaret and John, this is the prospective couple, at another table, he doing his best to make himself agreeable and prevail on her to take a glass of punch, or to take a sip out of his tumbler so that it might be sweetened for him. If she can be prevailed on so far, he immediately applies his lips to the same part of the glass touched by hers, and considerable progress is made. Meanwhile, a friendly spirit hovers over the other table, and many dialats are uttered and health drunk, and many times hands grasped across the table. In most cases, all that is attempted at this chance, kind of quote-unquote, meeting is the establishment of a good understanding between the families and the commencement of a liking on the part of the young people. So then they'd go away, and then after that, you'd have to have members of the family go to her, say, parents, go to her father, or the two fathers meet, and they start to try and strike a bargain, basically, and they talk about the dowry and the economics of the whole thing. So it's not just a singular kind of romantic process, it's a broader social process, and there's a broader thing at play. I have a recording here from a man recorded by Jim Delaney, one of the full-time collectors. This was recorded in Athlone in Roscommon in 1961, and this is the man called Thomas Kelly, and he's describing matchmaking at a fair. And then this kind of supper to strike the bargain. He then goes on to tell a joke which I've removed for now, so as not to scandalise the more delicate listener.
Censorship, Jonny.
Yes, indeed.
Well, in olden days, a man looking for a wife was generally introduced in a fair. The parents would meet. Now, if this man wanted a woman, his father met another old man that he knew, and if he had a daughter suitable, or at least he thought she was suitable, they would arrange to make a match. Now, in a great many cases, the man that was married might never see the wife until the day he married her. True. And what he wanted at the time, he got a few bob of money, it was alright. Now, the supper was held in the bride's house.
Before the wedding?
Before the wedding, a week beforehand. Now, he brought his relatives along. The Findus case, more than anything else, he brought his uncle or brother along, you see, and they made a hard bargain for the fortune. Yeah. The divide of £5 and £10 and so forth, you see. Yeah. And he got his money there, you see, and they arranged for the day they'd be married. So whatever woman come to the church, now he married her, and he couldn't make nothing about it.
So that's the going to the fairs, making the match and so on, but it shows the kind of, I suppose, what was common practice the country over. As far as kind of these practices are concerned.
There's a lovely reference from Mayo actually where they mention Ian na Guggerny, or the Fair of Whispers, which I just think is a wonderfully drawn image of these families and fathers more often than not negotiating and undertaking these machinations to kind of match up sons and daughters. Yeah, so the Fairs of Whispers. It's lovely. But one of the other things, kind of for the sake of rounding the circle of matchmaking, elopements, something else that perhaps is lesser known are these marriage by abductions or marriage by capture. Not one I'd recommend, Jonny, with the old law and order obsession that we have at the moment. But,
obsession indeed.
But yeah, so this was a thing as apparently up until the mid-19th century, into like the kind of 1850s or so, which I find remarkable, that women could be stolen from the safety and security of their homes by these kind of local lotharios who had taken a fancy to them. Now, sometimes it would be voluntary and consensual in the sense that the woman had wanted to be married to this man.
This thing I didn't hear, that she wanted to force her parents' hand.
Yeah,
almost.
in some way. Now again, I can't speak to this personally, but the literature that I've been reading and those that I trust as sources speak of this.
Like it was a plot between a couple.
Yes, almost. Exactly. Because the thing is, and this I suppose makes sense to a certain degree, once she had spent the night in his home, and she would always apparently be taken care of very well, but it was somehow, even though nothing necessarily would have happened physically between them, she would have been somehow viewed as being tainted.
Just the name
somehow.
Of the family, kind of.
Yeah, having spent the night with this man. And so it was, as you said, seen as a way to kind of force the parents' hand to say, well, she might not get another offer now, so we may as well agree. And so one of the Kerry references speaks about the families more often than not agreeing to the marriage and kind of settling down to kind of agree on the dowries and the practicalities. But one of the fascinating things that I hadn't realised and I discovered in the archive was from County Clare and County Galway that there was a band of professional abductors called the Terrys,
Mad.
led by Terence O'Brien, who apparently would kind of steal away your love for a price, basically. You know?
Thanks, Terry.
Thanks, Terry. Yeah, so there's a recollection here from County Clare from Margaret Maloney, who was 65 or 70 when she was giving this piece of information to Sean O'Flanagan on the 23rd of May 1937. And she is basically describing, in my grandfather's house in the time of the Terrys, there was a young lady called Miss McAllen, and she had a dowry of £100, which was a significant amount.
Yes, indeed.
And in those days of the Terrys, they would come if a girl took their fancy and steal her away. And so this woman now speaking to our collector remembers this woman being kind of kept almost under armed guard in her house so as not to be stolen away because she had taken a fancy, or someone had taken a fancy to her. So the Terrys in County Clare and County Galway, and this is a recollection in 1937, but she's obviously remembering a time in her grandfather's house.
Yeah.
But again, not altogether so distant in the past.
No,
You know?
not at all. Bizarre. I wasn't familiar with that at all.
I should hope not, Jonny.
No, well, yeah, the Terrys, good grief. I suppose, is it worth delivering some abuse to those who refuse to take the plunge?
Yes, absolutely.
Should we? I feel like we should.
We'll probably be one of them ourselves. Crikey, if we
no,
don't get a move on.
heaven forbid. We won't be have ourselves coming from the Skelligs lists. The since the, as we mentioned, the kind of the traditional phase for marriage is Shrove, and at Lent you can't marry, and so all across the country there developed the practice on the Sunday before Lent of kind of marking and abusing the unmarried bachelors and the unmarried boys and girls in the community, but also then the kind of older spinsters and crusty old bachelors and vinegary maids and so on, as Kevin Danaher mentioned. These
Awful
people
words,
who it's hilarious. They kind of make up the comedy of life, as he describes, basically. And they would often be met with kind of, I suppose, chalk. They'd be chased and people would put chalk on the backs of the unmarried. In some instances, in parts of the Midlands or parts of Leitrim and places like this, salt was thrown
To preserve them.
to keep them so that they'd keep until the next year. Ashes were sometimes put on people. Some people were raddled with the kind of stuff that was put on sheep, which wouldn't come out of your clothing at all.
Were some taken and tied to things by
In
ropes?
Cork, people were taken and they were tied and they were paraded down the street, and there was a list of passengers in the boat, and the boat was said to be going to the Skelligs. And the Skelligs, I suppose, refers to Skellig Vihil, which is a kind of premonitory fort on a bloody rock sticking out of the sea. Incredible place, built by
Star Wars is filmed there, is that?
yes,
that's the
it
whole thing,
features
yeah.
there, yeah. Which I suppose is part of the kind of flourishing of monastic tradition that appeared in Ireland from the kind of 5th and 6th centuries on, whatever, where you had these monks living on their own ascetic tradition up on this rock, on this fort, on this monastery, whatever. But the kind of rumour arose in folk tradition that there was an argument, I suppose, between how time was reckoned on the mainland and on the island, with the kind of conflict between the Gregorian and the Julian calendar, the earlier Julian calendar that the Gregorian kind of replaced. And the idea was that if you weren't married by Shrove, you could travel to the Skelligs, where it was technically 2 weeks in the past or 11 days in the past, and you could get married there because it was still Lent hadn't commenced there. So these Skelligs lists kind of appear and begin as lists of kind of bawdy poems matching incongruous pairs. And this is like what you're mentioning, what we were talking about before, about how tradition applies a pressure to you. It says, it dictates this is what's correct, and I suppose there's an aspect of kind of humorously but punishing those who don't take the plunge and so on. But interestingly, there was also often those, say an old man who would marry a young woman, he was often met with scorn from the community, and there was the process called horning, where they would blow horns and so on and cause a racket, because the condemnation that was being expressed was the idea that this man is going to die before his sons are raised, and they're either going to be disinherited when she marries again, or you're just going to have a widow with a lot of young sons and no husband.
No land, yeah.
So the community kind of, it expresses its disquiet at certain arrangements through customary practice, like Skellig's lists, like Chalk Sunday, and so on and so forth. But there's a couple of pieces that we have on this. This is Mary Woods, and she's describing this practice of people being salted.
Now you say that there was at least one little trick played on somebody, would say, who didn't get married during Shrove.
It was a very ugly trick. I wouldn't like it at all, but it just occurred to me now that the girl was salted, as you might say. Is that not assaulted? No.
Yeah.
But salted. They said she hadn't got married this time, and some few met her, and they had a bar of salt, the big stone bar of salt. And they had grated it and threw it at her and said she'd keep until Easter. That was one of the tricks. There might be other ones now, but I don't know whether. I only heard of that one.
So that's the salting of the unmarried to preserve them, and this is a kind of common practice, and the writing of Skellig's lists, such as these kind of bawdy, humorous poems that were kind of composed in honour of these incongruous couples. Do you have a copy of one there?
I do have one here that was actually available on doohas.ie, our online platform. And again, if you pop on there and key in Skellig list, you'll actually get some, well, I say wonderful examples. Let's call them colourful. But one is written for Dan Cronin, who's seen many a summer. In truth, we'll say 40, since he first read his primer. He searched all the country, in fact spent his life, in hope he could get a large fortune and wife. The bloom of his summer is now faded by. 'Twould be his best plan just to lie down and die. Oh, poor old Dan. And on and on and on it goes. And again, it kind of moved on to the next poor fella, who is Joe O'Donnell. I can't make out that surname. Yeah. But on and on it goes. Again, matching up people with very ill-suited partners for them and just condemning them for not following the social contract.
It's hilarious and awful. This is a lovely piece I found in the archive, edited together. This is Catherine Spillane, and she was originally from Castle Gregory in Tralee, and she's now living in Holyoke, Massachusetts. There was a series of recordings made by our former director here, Professor Seamus O'Cahan, and a former sound archivist, Leo Corduff, Mayo Man. The two of them travelled around Massachusetts specifically, I think, recording people who had left Ireland and their memories and so on and so forth. And this woman from Kerry is describing the Skellig exists, but she won't tell them. And she's talking about how she'll be carted off and arrested, and it's a lovely piece, but here we are.
Would you tell us about the Skellig lists, Catherine?
You rogue. Another rogue again. Oh, I don't know.
And what did they do? Did they make songs about people?
Oh, yes, some cute ones, but I don't remember them now. If I ever oh no, I'd get arrested, I wouldn't.
That's all right, they're nice.
That's all right.
It's nice to...
Oh, I wouldn't be afraid of these at all. What would I do if someone came around here to me and wrote to me and told me what did you tell all them fellas?
Don't worry about that. That's all right. You're safe enough. And did people sing them, or did they just recite them?
They used to sing them, recite, but it was nice, just like a song, you know. And then they'd be going to some other places to parties, you know, they'd have parties and different things. And the fella'd stand out on the floor and start to sing the song. But that was home, everyone knew who it was, you know.
Did the people...
But not now, that isn't in this country, dear, no.
Sing one now. Will you not sing a verse?
Oh, no, I'm not a good singer.
Hello, you could just carry the tune.
Just recite it, one of the... I give all my holding, the
Give us that one, Kate.
No, I wouldn't give you nothing.
I give all my holdings. Go ahead, come on, everybody have that
Just
one.
that little one, you know.
But all the money I have in the bank. No.
Will you write them out for us?
I will. I'll mail them to you.
All right.
I'll mail them to you.
She held out for her good name.
Isn't it incredible how she keeps her accent after all those years away?
Yeah, that is amazing, yeah.
Oh,
but she's so, I'm sure it's kind of so innocuous by today's standards, but she absolutely kind of just, I've edited that a few bits out, and they're going for a while and coming back to it, and she won't, and she won't name the place and so on and so on. But those were kind of, a common kind of expression of humorous contempt, I suppose. And young people could kind of take it in their stride, or it'd be humorous, or, you know, it's kind of, it's fine. But I suppose, but for the older members of the community who hadn't married for whatever reason, that's the thing that would kind of sting more in that sense, you know.
Yeah.
And actually, there's a brief piece I have here. It's kind of unrelated, I suppose, but of Lido Holton again describing St. Valentine's Day as a kind of, obviously the common thing nowadays, which I think is largely really an American import and a kind of relatively fabricated holiday in its origins, in the sense that it was a kind of explicitly commercialized kind of drive to get these things going, as opposed to there's not an old devotion to the saint in this country that goes back.
No, it's much newer.
Although there are relics on Whitefriar Street that people actually visit in their droves on Valentine's Day in hope of finding love and so on. But Lido Holton is describing she's asked about Valentine's Day in her time. This is from the Urban Folklore Project, recorded in 1980.
But every Tuesday now is St. Anthony's Day.
Happy Tuesday.
We always go up and light our lamp or our candle.
Yeah.
We honour him. I pray to her very much.
Mm-hmm.
St. Anthony.
So today now is the 14th of February, St. Valentine's Day. Used to celebrate St. Valentine's?
Not at all. Never heard of it.
No.
Never heard of it until this new generation has come in.
With the cards?
With the cards. Never heard of it.
Mm-hmm.
And there was never Christmas cards when I was young.
Mm-hmm. And how about on Candlemas Day, the 2nd of February, or the purification?
That's the blessing of the candle.
Yeah.
Yes, we go with that.
So,
yeah.
Marriage Luck we wanted to do this for one of our loyal listeners, didn't we, who was very kind in coming back to us with some feedback and some suggestions of what he would like to hear on Blúiríní Béaloidis. And it turns out that he has the very good fortune of having become engaged recently and will be married later in the year. So that is Dillon Kearney, who we are very grateful that he continues to listen.
Indeed.
And we hope that he and his partner are incredibly happy and wish them every great luck for a long, peaceful, happy, healthy life.
I found a charm for him in Untitled. This is Urtha Sharka agus Shir Craw, a charm for love and lasting affection, which he can employ. It says, Urtha a churmurja in im, Urtha Sharka is Shir Craw, nar stada de chullen ach darve urum, galanan de gramach nee, mar lanas and vo and lee on la shaka lama wash. So a charm for love and lasting affection. The charm Mary put on the butter is the charm for love and lasting affection. May your body not cease to pay me attention. May your love follow my face as the cow follows the calf from today till the day I die. Huzzah. Like that. That'll do
quite
it.
nice.
Have we just officiated a marriage, Claire?
Oh well, if the podcast doesn't work out, we can always
True enough.
open a franchise.
Shall we leave it there?
I think we'll leave on that positive note and wish Dillon and his lovely partner well.
Good long. This is Mrs. McLaughlin, and this was recorded in Rosscray in Tipperary in 1984. The Banks of the Roses, a beautiful little song.
Is this a positive song?
It is. It's a lovely
Excellent,
little song. It's a lovely
excellent.
little. I love this song, and she's being helped along by maybe, I don't know, her friends or whoever are with her. But we shall leave you with this happy wee note and see you next month.
It's fine, I heard you.
So on.
Yeah.
If ever I get married, it will be in the month of May, when the fields they are green and the meadows they'll be gay. For me and my true love to roll sport and play, all alone by the banks of the roses. On the banks of the roses, where me and my love sat down, I pulled out me German flute for to play me love a tune. And in the middle of the tune, she smiled and she said, "Oh, Johnny, lovely Johnny, do not leave me. Johnny, lovely Johnny, you have my poor heart won. You are my evening's bright star and the morning's early sun. And if I do not gain you the strength that I will run all alone by the banks of the roses."
There you are now.
Indeed, I am no drunkard, and very well it's known I can drink when I like, love or leave it alone. And if your mother doesn't like me, she can keep you at home, and it's then I look out for another. Whiskey is a cordial that I do not like at all. The reason I don't like it, the measure is too small. I would like a jug of ale that would go around us all, and I'd like to see me darling drinking brandy. Indeed, I am no drunkard, and very well it's known. I can drink if I like, love, or leave it alone. And if your parents they don't like you, they can give you a tone. And it's then I look out for another. These parents they got married, as we hear the people say. They may take another road on the very next day. Making providence direct them and guide them the right way, and adieu to the banks of the roses. I think that's it.
That's grand now. That's lovely now.
Yeah, sure, be
They're into that.
Did we leave it a significant gap so you can edit this out? You can. Right.
This is all going in. I've decided to stop editing everything. I just want for clarity and
Director's
authenticity.
cut.
Yeah, I've decided that I'm not going to edit anything out anymore because people need to know, frankly, how difficult it is, Claire, to do this podcast with you every week or however often it is.
Every month.
So this is all going in.
Lovely, lovely. That'll be us now. Fire in the morning.